Welcome everyone to today's episode of the Time Turners podcast. I am your host, Jack White. For those that are new here, this podcast dives into historical events that most are not taught in school. The topic for today's episode is the Medici family. More specifically, the role they played in the patronage of art and culture during the Renaissance era. Before we can start talking about the Medici family, we have to dive into the history of the Republic of Florence and the Renaissance. The Renaissance era lasted throughout the 15th and 16th century. During this time, Italy was broken up into many city-states, one of those being Florence. Florence was seen as one of the most important and powerful city-states during this time, as it was an important center for trade. Florence was also run under a republican system and by oligarchies. This means there was a small group of wealthy individuals who had control over Florence due to their money and power. Okay, now that we got that over with, we can now dive into the Medici family. The Medici family were bankers from Florence. They started off lending money and doing people favors until they eventually were able to spread the Medici Bank all across Europe. There would be Medici banks in major European cities like London, Antwerp, Bruges, Avignon, Lyon, and many Italian cities. This would allow the Medici to access huge amounts of information from different parts of Europe. How did they rise to power? To break it down, I'm first going to talk about the originator of the Medici family, the one who started it all, the one and only Cosimo de' Medici. Cosimo was the family member that started it all. He was the mastermind behind the family. He was a banker in Florence and gained his wealth and power through banking. He was amazing at using this wealth and power to get favors done and infiltrate the republican system. Cosimo would use his money to finance things behind the scenes. This was due to the church. The church held the most power in Italy during the Renaissance, and they had the power to create the rules. One of these rules being usury. Usury is the illegal practice of lending money at unreasonably high interest rates. The Medici's practices of banking were frowned upon by the church as they committed usury. They would have to finance things behind the scenes as a way to slip under the church's radar. Cosimo was responsible for the expansion of the Medici banks across Europe. He rose to political power in 1434 and was the uncrowned monarch of Florence until his death in 1464 at the age of 74. The next member of the family that we're going to talk about is Lorenzo de' Medici, also known as Lorenzo the Magnificent. He was the grandson of Cosimo. Lorenzo was set up for greatness since his childhood. He was well educated in the humanities, and when he was only a teenager, he was sent on his first diplomatic mission to Naples to congratulate the new pope. Lorenzo wasn't much of a banker, but instead, he was actually known to have a passion for writing poetry and was a patron of the arts. He was known for using his money to organize public entertainment events, such as jousting, bullfighting, and football matches. He did this to keep the lower class happy with his regime. A fun fact about these public entertainment events is that the Italian painter Botticelli designed some of them. Lorenzo was known for being a great statesman and bringing together the politicians and arts. Lorenzo was around during a problematic time for banking. This was mainly due to banks giving out political loans mostly for Milan and England. This led to governments not paying back their debts, like King Edward IV of England and the Duke of Milan, who owed the Medici family 9,000 ducats, which was the equivalent to the wages of 6,000 to 7,000 building workers. On April 26, 1478, Lorenzo was attacked by the Pazzi conspiracy, which was an attempt to assassinate Lorenzo by the rival Pazzi family. Lorenzo was attending Easter Mass, and when the toast was raised by the priest, Lorenzo was rushed by men wielding knives. Lorenzo was able to escape with minor injuries, but the Pazzi family were all killed as a result in trying to overthrow the Medici clan. Before we go into our next segment, we have a message from our sponsors. Are you ready to visualize history like never before? Well, Historia Maps offers super detailed and interactive maps that show off historical battles, migration routes, and all great empires of the past. I would seriously suggest Historia Maps to students, educators, and anyone who loves history. You can visit historiamaps.ca to start your journey. Use my promo code TIMETURNERS in all caps for a whopping 35% off your next purchase. The Medici's impact on art and culture. During the Renaissance era, the Latin culture was favored in scholarship, which the Medicis engaged in patronages like Angelo Poliziano, who was one of history's greatest Latin scholars. The Medici were also highly interested in Greek scholarship, even though Greek wasn't widely known in the Middle Ages. They gave great support to the revival of Plato and all the other Platonic philosophers. This was one of the most important achievements of the Renaissance, because the Renaissance was the rebirth of art and culture and literature of ancient Rome and Greece. The Medici family helped create the major artists of the Renaissance, such as Donatello, Botticelli, Leonardo da Vinci, and Raphael. Giovanni de' Medici, better known as Pope Leo X, was responsible for making the largest expansion of the College of Cardinals ever. He packed it with his family members and supporters, hoping that this would lead to more power in the papacy. For those who don't know, the cardinal is the second highest rank in the Catholic Church. A group of cardinals get to select who becomes the next pope, but only a cardinal can become a pope. The Medici spent their fortune on building great buildings and chapels, as well as making great artists. For an example, the University of Pisa, as you can see in this photo. The downfall of the Medici family. The Medici family ended after Gian Gastone de' Medici led a life of debauchery and passed away without any male heirs in 1737. After Gian's death, the last Medici member was Anna Maria de' Medici, who passed away in 1743. This led to the great Medici bloodline dying out after being in control of Florence for almost 300 years. Before we end this episode, I thought it would be a good idea to give out some fun facts about the Medici family. Starting off with our first fun fact. There were 4 different Medici popes: Leo X, Clement VII, Pius IV, and Leo XI. The Medici family was exiled from Florence in 1492 until 1512. The last Medici family member, Anna Maria de' Medici, bequeathed the family art collection to the city of Florence with the proviso that it shall never leave the city. This is why Florence is the art treasure it is today. Pope Clement VII had 2 illegitimate sons, one of them being Alessandro de' Medici, who was the first black head of state in the modern West. It was suspected that his mother was a slave or a servant and was of African descent. I'm quickly going to rate my 3 main sources of information that I used to create this podcast. The first main source of information I'm going to rate is the book The Medici by Paul Strathern. I would rate this a 6 out of 10. It was a decently long read, and it took a long time to get the information from the book. Overall, 6 out of 10, it just wasn't the best. The next source of information that I'm going to rate is the BBC Medici podcast. I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10 because there's a ton of useful information that I've used in this podcast right now. But the only con of it was messy. The timeline was all messed up. There were random points that shouldn't have been there. It would go from the 15th century back down to the 13th century. It just was all over the place. The last source of information that I'm going to rate is the article of my choice. How did the Medici family support the arts? By The Collector. I'm going to rate this an overall 6 out of 10. It was a super quick and easy read, and it had useful information in it, but there wasn't enough. But you can expect that from a short article. So overall, compared to the other ones, I'd give it a 6 out of 10. The Medici family played a huge role in the patronage of art and culture during the Renaissance, as they invested and produced some of the largest and most significant artists of all time, as well as reviving Greek scholarship. I think that I covered this topic without any bias. I definitely could have gone over all the negative things the Medici family did, but that would not have been on topic. Thanks for watching, and remember to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the content. And check out my Instagram and Twitter accounts, linked down in the description below. Comment any questions you have, and I'll make sure to answer them. This was your host, Jack White. I hope you all have an amazing day.